So welcome back for our final Delve Into Deepholm card review. The remaining cards here have been revealed. That means we've got Paladin, Shaman, and even some warrior cards today as well. And the final legendary of the set, as you see behind me here, Sir Finley the Intrepid is joining the fellow League of Explorers with a new card here, and also introduces, as you'll see, the excavate mechanic here to Paladin and Shaman alongside some other cards in this video. So you've got Sir Finley here, which is kind of one of the payoff cards when you've excavated, but we also need to take a look at, before we review Sir Finley, the other pieces of the puzzle, like the new treasures. These are the legendary treasures for Shaman excavations. The Azurite Murloc is a 4-mana 5/5 elemental Murloc. Battlecry, transform all your other minions into ones that cost 3 more, keeping their original costs. Now, all in this case means board, deck, and hand. That's why that keeping their original cost matters for hand and deck, much like Deck of Lunacy used to work in the past. If you have a 1-mana card, a minion in particular, in your deck, that is going to transform into a 4-cost minion. So it could transform, into a Chillwind Yeti, a 4/5, but it's still going to keep its 1 cost. So you could get a 1-mana 4/5, basically. I don't actually know if Chillwind Yeti's in standard, but you get the idea. It's the classic 4-cost example. So on board, this will just work as a normal evolve where everything gets 3 bigger, but in hand and in deck, you're going to get those bonus stats, potentially some awesome effects as well from higher cost cards, while keeping their original costs, making them much cheaper to play. Now for Paladin, we've got the Azurite Dragon. This guy looks sick. 4-mana 5/5 again, of course, elemental dragon. Battle cry, give all other minions in your hand, deck, and battlefield +3/+3. So unlike the Azurite Murloc, in this case, you're going to keep the effects of your cards. You're going to keep their costs, but this is going to just make them bigger by 3/3. But same number of cards are affected in this case. Interesting that these use different wording, but I guess they needed to squeeze a lot more into the Azurite Murloc, but they do affect the same amount of cards in this case. So Azurite Dragon could be like nice big board buff finisher if you got a lot of stuff on board. This is like a super savage roar, just bloodlust type effect on board, but also just big stats in hand and deck, especially if you're rocking stuff like Divine Shields. Real quickly, let's also take a look at the excavate cards themselves, because these matter as we take a look at Sir Finley. This is Shroomscavate, dual class Paladin Shaman. Give a minion Wind Fury and Divine Shield. Excavate a treasure. That's at 3 mana. Then we also have Digging Straight Down, a 4-mana Shaman spell that deals 8 to a minion. Excavates a treasure. That's a nature spell. And then finally, for these excavate cards is the fossilized Kaleidosaur, which is so cool seeing the Kaleidosaur return here for Paladin. 4-mana 3/4 undead and beast with Battlecry, gain 2 random bonus effects. Those are your bonus keywords: taunt, lifesteal, rush, etc. And also excavate a treasure. So that is the new excavate package for these classes. Basically, they're both getting a dedicated excavate card and then this shared dual class excavate card, giving them 2 excavate cards per class, which matches up with other classes that also get 2 excavate activators for each class. And then here we've got their payoffs as well for those big 4-cost treasures for their 4th excavate. And then Finley also here is kind of a synergy payoff card as well. And finally, let's talk about him in more detail. He is a 3-mana 2/3 Murloc. Battle cry, if you've excavated twice, transform all enemy minions into 1/1 Murloc. So this is basically an asymmetrical super polymorph of sorts, a mass polymorph in fact, but landing at only 3 mana and on a body. So you're getting the Sir Finley here with a mass polymorph on a stick, and that is really swingy. And there are plenty of different board states where this could feel very valuable, whether that is just raw bigger stats, going as a board of 3/3s, turn it into a board of 1/1s, far less intimidating, assuming I guess you've had time to excavate by then. But very often, like on turn 5 or something, the board's looking kind of nasty, you've had a couple excavates in the can. Sir Finley feels like he's worth it just to start stabilizing some of that aggression, maybe setting up for a board clear that's going to work against one one health stuff, but won't work against bigger sizes. And then perhaps more importantly, you know, some of these like crazy boards we've seen from like Dragon Druid with a bunch of dragon golems, and there's a wide board of gigantic dragon golems out of nowhere. Again, you can kind of negate that by transferring them into 1/1s. Or your opponent has played a big Titan that you don't have an easy way to answer, and you want to make sure that Titan is dealt with. Well, suddenly that Titan is a 1/1. And sometimes that might be worth it on just a singular card. Using Sir Finley as a singular polymorph is still going to feel worth it for only 3 mana. That's kind of insane. So you've got both this wide board upside, and also sometimes those singular targets are just going to feel like a nice payoff as well. Setting up for removal, or just maybe leaving the 1/1s around if needed, just negating their threat essentially by neutering them down to those 1/1 sizes. So to me, I mean, this is a very, very powerful effect, a very big swing. So then it really just boils down to a conversation about whether or not the Excavate packages are actually going to get played in these classes. And I think there's always a good chance. We've actually seen most of the other Excavate cards do solid, like Rogues particularly stand out. Very, very good with Excavate package. Death Knights, pretty well utilized as well. Beyond that, it's a little shakier, but both Warrior and Mage use Excavate in playable decks right now. I guess Warlock technically has as well, but probably seems like the least utilized at the moment for their Excavate cards. So, you know, I think there's a good chance one or the other just makes it work in some way or another. I will say, you know, based on what we saw, these are kind of like minion-based payoffs. These award slightly more aggressive minion-oriented strategies, like you want these stats and this tempo off of these 4-cost treasures, while I would say digging straight down is definitely more a defensive and passive secondary kind of Excavate activation. Kaleidosaur's okay in a minion-based aggro deck, so maybe this makes a little bit more sense for Paladin to me. This is also, of course, paying off your minions. So some kind of like faster, more aggressive Paladin might be able to weave in Excavates. Shaman, it seems a little less clear to me. Some kind of evolved Shaman, just pile of stuff. Maybe it makes sense, but Paladin does look like an angle for Sir Finley, and this payoff is just so significant and so affordable that it might be the excuse to run these Excavate cards after all. So moving on to Shroomscavate. This is that 3-mana spell. Again, give a minion Wind Fury and Divine Shield, and then excavate a treasure. So this is an interesting one because it is one of those Excavate cards where it's not always going to be cheap and affordable to play, which was a bit of a problem we saw for some of the Warrior ones initially until some buffs hit. So, you know, in other words, if you don't have a board like going on to turn 3, Shroomscavate's going to feel really bad sitting in hand. You can't use it on turn 3. Like, yes, for Paladin in particular, you always have a hero power as a backup. I mean, I guess Shaman does too, although most totems would feel really bad with Fury and Divine Shield. You don't want to like spin that overhead. You don't want to have to necessarily wait to play this until you get a minion to go with it on the same turn, because that's delaying your Excavate chains, etc. That's pushing it all back. So this one does really encourage you to be ahead on board, both for its utilization, because you probably want to use that Divine Shield to like trade into something and then maybe still be able to go face or attack twice to clean up the opponent's board, swing things back. So there are some real clear benefits, of course, to playing this cleanly on curve, basically, while still ahead, which can absolutely happen with, you know, Divine Shield Paladin decks. Stuff can certainly linger around and be left behind, but when it doesn't, this is going to feel particularly sticky. And then in Shaman, you know, is there a deck that's going to feel good for that? I think that's less likely than Paladin. Now, you could also perhaps use this as a finisher of sorts. That threat of Wind Fury can be really scary. We've seen that in a variety of different metas, particularly Paladin with buff cards that's basically doubling all of your other buffs. That can be especially nasty, where, you know, this becomes a threat where the opponent just knows they're dead if they can't answer certain things. So that's a cool tool to have as a backup, but that also kind of neutralizes the Excavate upside of this. If you're using it as a finisher, you don't really care usually about the Excavate treasure necessarily. So you're going to want to weave this in perhaps to get those Excavate chains going. So in longer games, maybe this becomes less of a threat for lethal, more of an Excavate builder. If you're looking to push, maybe that Wind Fury could be really threatening or just straight up lethal. So I don't know, it's an interesting angle for Paladin to me, but less so for Shaman. But I do like the lethality potential of Wind Fury. Divine Shield's a great synergy for Paladin in particular with buffs, as is Wind Fury. And the Excavate payoff, I think, too, is pretty dang threatening as well. So I can see this coming together cleaner for Paladin once again. So moving on over to the Shaman Excavate spell here, digging straight down, 4-mana spell that deals 8 damage to a minion and excavates a treasure. This is fine, but it's a pretty expensive way to deal big damage to a minion. And again, this is one of those excavate cards too, where there may not always be good moments to use this. Like if you're going into turn 4 and you just want to advance your excavate chain, your opponent has like a 3/3 on board or something, it's fine, right? It just feels a little excessive. It feels like overkill. It feels like perhaps if this were just cheaper and allowed you to weave it into a turn easier, you might be able to advance other game plans, you might be able to draw a card, develop some tempo. Whereas with this, you're sort of all in on the damage when you might not need it, which probably feels okay sometimes. Late in the game, kill a Titan or something, you're pretty happy for 4 mana. But very often on curve or early on, it's not going to feel all that clean or good. Not to mention, this is a spell and defensive game plan that's rewarding, I think, an Excavate Treasure here with the Azerite Murloc that is probably not as good for a control or defensive sort of deck. This is going to want a bunch of little cheap fodder that just gets transformed into bigger stuff. It's going to be hard to be consistent on a game plan there, weaving all of this together. So to me, this one does feel a little bit clunkier for an Excavate card. Moving over to Paladin again, the I cannot say fossilized Kaleidosaur. That's a tough one. The fossilized Kaleidosaur is a 4-mana 3/4 undead and beast pairing. Battlecry, gain 2 random bonus effects and excavate a treasure. So this one makes a little bit more sense to me because this is an independently playable excavate. It always just kind of works when you want to play it. As far as the results of the minion, there are definitely going to be some moments where it feels better than others. You know, if you get like Rush and Divine Shield, for instance, might feel great to play on turn 4, clean up the opponent's board, get something left behind. There'll be other moments it feels kind of pointless. You get like Taunt and Poisonous and the opponent like kills it with a weapon or something, and those keywords felt like they didn't do much at all. But on average, you know, I think Divine Shield and Stealth in particular could play really well into Paladin's game plans with buffs and minions on board. And then Taunt can have value. Rush can certainly have lots of value. Poisonous can be pretty hit or miss, but usually I think a miss. Lifesteal, same story. So I don't know if I addressed all of the bonus effects there, but basically probably half are good, half don't feel so good. So you might hit on one good one pretty often with 2 random bonus effects. It won't usually feel like a total whiff. The base stat line here is more of a total whiff, but you're getting a treasure out of it too. So you're willing to probably sacrifice at least a little bit of quality on board for your minion, which is going to happen compared to other playable 4-drop things you might want to do in exchange for that treasure and advancing your excavates into a better spot. So I just like that this works, though, is the important thing. A lot of these other excavates feel like they don't always work. This one does. That feels so much cleaner, so much safer. It also rewards your payoffs. It's synergistic within its own package because it is indeed a minion getting a minion base payoff. So the Kaleidosaur looks much more sensible to me as a coherent kind of game plan that makes sense together. So moving on, we have a couple dual class cards remaining here for Shaman and Warrior together. This is the Needle Rock Totem, a 2-mana 0/2 totem at the end of your turn. Gain 2 armor and draw a card. And yeah, I actually like that just fine. This gives you multiple things you like to do, particularly in more defensively oriented warrior decks. Now, this doesn't play especially well with Odin because, of course, once it's end of turn, you can't attack. But as just like a setup card to get things moving, just something to weave into your earlier turns, drawing cards is great and gaining armor is great. And the threat of this just kind of lingering because it's not that threatening from the opponent. They might just kind of disrespect this. And then getting multiple cards and getting even more armor out of it's really nice. So that could be a cool bonus. Now, as far as like totem synergies and Shaman are concerned, you don't really see a lot of totem synergies paying off for this. The totem based plans are usually a little bit more aggressively minded, care more about getting pressure and advancing kind of a tempo game plan, which just doesn't do especially well. So I guess they could potentially need that card draw, and this fits in, but the armor might feel like a little bit more of a waste in Shaman, although a way for a class access armor that doesn't otherwise have a lot of access might be valuable in some particular metas too. So I think this card's an interesting little one because of that card draw that makes this feel pretty good in a lot of cases and kind of scary if it sticks around on board. And then finally here, our last card of the mini set, it is Aftershocks, a new 4-mana dual class Shaman Warrior spell. It's a nature spell and it deals 1 damage to all minions 3 times. So we're getting like 3 Warpaths or 3 pings off of a Defile here out of your Aftershocks. And it also costs 2 less if you cast a spell last turn, which that's going to happen a lot. Any kind of control deck that's trying to use this as a defensive tool is going to be casting spells. Will it be every turn? No. Will there be many instances where this does land at 2 and you feel much better about it in that case? Super efficient removal in that Defile style. Clearly doesn't have the upside of something like Defile. Clearly doesn't have the increased kind of flexibility of something like Warpath, but it's much cheaper than Warpath, much more reliable than Defile, because this can kill a board of 3/3s. You don't need to set up the math. So this feels like a good middle ground, that I think a 3 damage AoE in particular lines up pretty well across a variety of different boards, which will feel pretty good for this one. Also, of course, scales really nicely with spell damage. If you're in Shaman in particular, this could be a lot bigger damage with any kind of spell damage enabler. Warrior not as likely typically to utilize spell damage, but Warrior also has some enraged stuff that could potentially work cool with this card. Various ways they benefit from minions getting damaged multiple times, and this could be a great way to do that. Set up for some big hand buffs, for instance, while perhaps still addressing the opponent's board. So I like this card. It's an interesting little tool that becomes pretty cheap and pretty effective at what it does. So that said, let's do some quick reviews. Sir Finley is a 4-star card. Shroom's Cavate is a 3-star card. Digging Straight Down is a 2-star card. Fossilized Kaleidosaur is a 3-star card. Needle Rock Totem is a 3-star card. Aftershocks is a 4-star card. And there you go. That wraps it up for the Delve Into Deepholm card reviews. Yeah, some exciting stuff. I'm excited to try out these new Azurite treasures. Just a reminder, I don't know if I said this, these are not collectible cards. I hope that's known by now, but in case I need to clarify that, that's why I don't review these. They don't get added to your deck, which I still think it's confusing they gave these legendary gems, but whatever. That's an old conversation. But yeah, excited to play these. I'll be playing. I'm gonna try to stream, and definitely gonna play some decks either way of all this fun new stuff. I think there's some really neat deck ideas coming with Therazane and Bran and so on. So excited to give all this a shot. So stay tuned for some more Hearthstone content for at least a little while I'm trying out new cards and new decks. That said, thank you for watching, and until next time, game on.